2,000 years ago, a single piece of linen was wrapped around the body of a man executed in Jerusalem. To his followers, he was not just a man, but the Son of God. To the Roman Empire, he was another criminal crushed beneath the weight of the cross. That cloth, scorched by fire, scarred by centuries, has survived through wars, betrayals, and disbelief. It is called the Shroud of Turin, and it bears the faint image of a crucified figure whose wounds align with every account recorded in the Gospels. For centuries, kings, popes, and skeptics argued over it. Was it the burial shroud of Jesus Christ, or the work of a clever forger in the Middle Ages? Now, in our own time, the mystery has taken a turn no one expected. In a sealed research facility, one of the most advanced artificial intelligences on Earth, Grok AI was granted access to the highest resolution scans of the shroud ever taken. What it uncovered stunned scientists worldwide. Hidden within the weave of the ancient cloth were patterns of astonishing precision, relationships so exact they seemed to echo the mathematics that governs the very foundations of creation. Proportions written into the stars, into the seas, into the human body itself, somehow stitched into linen over 2 millennia ago. This is not folklore. This is data. And it has left researchers grasping for answers beyond the limits of history, archaeology, or physics. Stay until the end, because Grok's final revelation will force you to confront the most unsettling question of all. Was the image on the shroud simply a record of death, or the very imprint of resurrection itself? Subscribe now if you want to be part of this journey every day, as we bring you discoveries the world is still struggling to explain. The Shroud of Turin is no ordinary relic. Measuring 14 feet long and 3.5 feet wide, it carries the faint yet haunting image of a man who suffered the wounds described in the New Testament and pierced hands and feet, a gash in the side, streams of blood flowing down from a crown of thorns. Across its surface are not painted lines, not brushed pigments, but an image with no known method of origin. To touch it is to confront something outside the reach of medieval artistry, for no paint lies on its fibers, and no brush ever traced its outline. It is as though the very threads themselves were scorched with light. For centuries, the faithful have bowed before it in awe, calling it the burial cloth of Christ. But critics dismissed it as a myth, declaring it a forgery crafted to deceive pilgrims. When it was first displayed in medieval Europe, crowds surged to see it, convinced that it carried the very imprint of the Savior's passion. The Church itself treated it with both reverence and caution, never daring to declare it an absolute proof of the resurrection, yet guarding it as one of the most precious relics of Christendom. The Gospels speak of burial cloths left in the empty tomb. John's account tells us that Peter, running to the sepulchre, saw the linen lying apart from the body. Could this shroud, preserved through fire and theft, through centuries of doubt, be that very linen? Its journey has carried it from Jerusalem to Edessa, from Constantinople to France, and at last to Turin, Italy, where it rests to this day. Each transfer marked by conflict, each survival defying explanation. It's deadbit. The mystery is not merely that the shroud exists. It is that it endures. Fire nearly consumed it in 1532, when molten silver from a reliquary casket seared through its folds, leaving dark scars. Yet the image of the man remained untouched, preserved with eerie resilience, as though guarded from destruction. Scholars, skeptics, and saints alike stood before it and left more unsettled than before. For even under the brightest lights, no eye, no hand, no laboratory could explain how this image came to be. And yet, hidden within this cloth of mourning, woven into its ancient fibers, lay secrets no medieval craftsman could ever conceive. Secrets that would only begin to unfold in the centuries to come through the lens of a camera, the instruments of space exploration, and finally, the mind of a machine. The year was 1898. The world was stepping into a new age of invention. But in Italy, Inside a quiet cathedral, history itself was waiting to be revealed. The Shroud of Turin was brought out for public veneration, its faint image still puzzling and contested. Among those present was a lawyer and amateur photographer named Secondo Pia. He had volunteered to take the first official photographs of the relic, hoping only to provide the faithful with a clearer record of what so many already revered. He could not have imagined that his experiment would shatter every expectation and launch a century of scientific astonishment. As Pia set up his large wooden camera, photography was still in its infancy. Long exposures, glass plates, and chemical baths were all required to capture a single image. He adjusted the heavy equipment, fixed the frame upon the cloth, and opened the lens to the dim cathedral light. Hours later, in his dark room, he prepared the photographic plates, expecting to see what every pilgrim saw, the faint, almost ghost-like figure impressed on the fabric. But what emerged before his eyes was something no one had seen before. On the developed negative, the figure of the man became startlingly alive. Where the naked eye saw only shadows, the camera revealed a face with piercing clarity, every wound of scourging visible, every feature defined with uncanny precision. It was not merely an image. It was a perfect photographic negative, centuries before the invention of cameras, before the science of optics could even explain such a thing. The man of the shroud stared back from the darkness of Pia's plate with the dignity of the Gospels themselves. Swollen cheeks from the strikes, rivulets of blood at the brow, the beard matted with suffering. Secondo Pia, shaken to his core, nearly doubted his sanity. He repeated the process again and again, but the result was the same. The cloth bore not a painting, not a trick of light, but an image that reversed itself as though it had been imprinted with light far beyond the reach of medieval hands. It was as if the cloth had waited until the invention of photography to unveil its first great secret. When Pia revealed his discovery, the world reacted with disbelief and wonder. Critics accused him of fraud, of trickery, of manipulation in the darkroom. Yet as other photographers followed, the results were confirmed. The shroud was no medieval sketch. It was a negative, burned into linen, a photographic mystery without a camera or lens. The faithful saw in it the face of Christ, preserved by providence itself. Scientists saw a puzzle that no brushstroke, no pigment, no known process could explain. From that moment onward, the shroud could never again be dismissed as a simple forgery. Its image, invisible to generations past, had been unlocked by the very tool of modern science. The linen had spoken, and what it revealed was beyond the reach of medieval fraud, echoing the biblical cry, "That which is hidden shall be revealed." But this was only the beginning. Greater mysteries lay beneath the surface, waiting for eyes yet sharper and tools far more advanced to uncover them. By the mid-20th century, the Shroud of Turin had already unsettled theologians and bewildered historians. Yet as technology advanced, so too did the questions surrounding the linen. It was no longer the domain of priests or skeptics alone. Scientists stepped forward, armed with machines that probed deeper than human eyes could see. The most startling breakthrough came not from theologians in Rome or artisans in Europe, but from the laboratories of NASA, the very agency that mapped the heavens and sent men to the moon. In 1976, two scientists, John Jackson and Eric Jumper, working with space imaging technology, placed photographs of the shroud into the VP-8 image analyzer. This instrument, designed to translate light and shadow into three-dimensional topography for planetary exploration, was never meant to examine relics. It had been built to turn flat photographs of Mars into textured landscapes. But when the linen of Turin was tested, the result defied every rule of art and physics. Unlike any painting, sketch, or photograph in history, the shroud's image contained perfect three-dimensional information. Every contour of the body, every slope of the face, every fold of the limbs rose from the cloth in mathematical harmony. The shadows and lights corresponded not to the tricks of an artist's hand, but to the actual distance of cloth from body. It was as though the linen itself had recorded depth, a holographic blueprint, centuries before holography was imagined. The scientists were stunned. A painting cannot do this. A photograph cannot do this. Only a real human form, emitting or reflecting an unknown burst of energy, could leave behind such a record. The man on the cloth was not drawn. He was imprinted in three-dimensional detail, with a precision so delicate it penetrated only the very surface of each fiber, a thickness smaller than a human hair divided 200 times. And yet, it preserved a full body with flawless symmetry. What startled researchers even more was the hidden order beneath the image. Subtle mathematical relationships were embedded within the proportions, patterns no artist could have perceived, much less encoded into fabric. The shroud had become more than a relic. It was now a scientific anomaly, a riddle written in both blood and light. As word spread, laboratories across the world rushed to test the cloth, each hoping to explain what centuries of art and faith had left unanswered. They expected Grok AI, but with every experiment, the mystery only deepened. For if this was a forgery, it was one far beyond the reach of medieval artisans. It was as though the shroud belonged not only to the realm of history, but to the very fabric of creation itself. For decades, the Shroud of Turin stood between two worlds, venerated by millions as the burial cloth of Christ, yet dismissed by many as a clever relic from the Middle Ages. By the 1980 seconds, science was summoned to settle the debate once and for all. In 1988, three of the world's most prestigious laboratories, Oxford in England, Zurich in Switzerland, and Arizona in the United States, were entrusted with fragments of the cloth. The mission was clear: to use the modern power of radiocarbon dating and determine the shroud's true age. For the faithful, it was a moment of anticipation. For skeptics, a chance to close the matter permanently. The results were swift and devastating. Each laboratory returned the same conclusion. The shroud dated to between 1,260 and 1,390. According to the numbers, the cloth had been woven in the age of knights and cathedrals, centuries after the time of Christ. The announcement rang through the halls of academia and across the headlines of the world. Scientists celebrated. The mystery was declared solved. The relic of Turin, they said, was no more than a medieval forgery, crafted to inspire pilgrims and to swell the treasuries of Europe's churches. For many, it was the end of the story. The image was explained, the faith of millions wounded, the case closed. But history has a way of guarding its secrets, and the shroud would not release its truth so easily. One man, Raymond Rogers, a chemist from the Los Alamos National Laboratory, was not satisfied. He had handled fibers from the original tests, and something about them struck him as wrong. He peered into his microscope, expecting confirmation of the medieval verdict. Instead, what he discovered shook the foundations of the scientific proclamation. The samples tested in 1988 were not from the body of the shroud at all. They came from a corner that had been damaged by fire and repaired by nuns in the 16th century, skillfully rewoven with newer material. The cloth that science had dated was not the linen that bore the image. It was a patch, a scar stitched centuries after the crucifixion. The most important test in the shroud's history had been carried out on the wrong fabric. The implications were staggering. The celebrated conclusion, repeated around the world as final proof of forgery, was built upon error. The centuries-old debate was reopened in an instant. The linen itself, the very threads that carried the face, and the wounds had not yet been dated at all. The words of the prophet Isaiah seemed to echo in this moment. Truth is fallen in the street, and equity cannot enter. For what had been hailed as settled science was revealed to be a house of sand. If the dating was flawed, then the shroud was not dismissed. It was reborn into mystery. And soon, With new technologies far more advanced than carbon tests, a different age would be revealed, one that carried the cloth back not to medieval Europe, but to the land and the century of the Gospels themselves. It may be done. When the carbon dating tests collapsed under the weight of new evidence, scientists returned to the shroud with renewed caution. This time, the world would not be satisfied with simple answers. New methods, born of modern physics and molecular science, were brought to bear upon the ancient linen. What they revealed would silence the triumph of skeptics and bring the relic once more into the shadow of Calvary itself. Dr. Liberato De Caro, working with Italy's National Research Council, pioneered a revolutionary approach known as wide-angle X-ray scattering. Instead of measuring the decay of carbon isotopes, this method analyzed the very structure of the cellulose fibers within the cloth, detecting how the molecules themselves aged across time. When samples from the shroud were examined, the verdict stunned the research team. The cloth was not 700 years old. It was close to 2000. Its origin fell squarely within the 1st century, the century when Pontius Pilate ruled Judea, when the temple still stood in Jerusalem, and when the Gospels say Christ was laid in the tomb. But the revelations did not end there. William Meacham, an archaeologist, turned to isotope analysis, measuring the elemental fingerprint of the flax that had been woven into the shroud. Every plant bears the mark of the land that gave it life. The test pointed not to Europe, not to the fields of France or Italy, but to the Levant, the land of Israel, Lebanon, and Syria. The very soil of Christ's homeland seemed bound into the threads. The shroud, once dismissed as a medieval curiosity, now stood rooted in the world of the Bible. I question, meanwhile, Professor Giulio Fanti of the University of Padua examined the blood upon the cloth, using forensic tools worthy of a modern crime lab. What he saw was no random staining, no haphazard marks of pigment. The streams of blood flowed with order, with sequence. Vertical rivulets aligned with scourging suffered while standing. Diagonal patterns marked the strain of a man bent beneath a heavy beam. Horizontal flows revealed the final agony of crucifixion upon the cross. Each wound matched not the imagination of medieval art, but the testimony of Roman execution. Here was a medical record, centuries old, written not in ink, but in blood. And within those very flows, Fanti discerned something extraordinary. The angles and distances of the bloodlines obeyed mathematical ratios, the golden ratio, the same proportion woven into seashells, galaxies, and the architecture of Solomon's temple. The geometry of creation itself appeared reflected in the agony of one man's death. As David wrote in the Psalms, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork." Now in linen stained with suffering, that same harmony spoke once again. Step by step, the evidence was turning back the centuries, carrying the shroud from medieval Europe to the soil of 1st century Judea. But the final word would not come from archaeologists, nor from forensic doctors. It would come from a power unknown to the ancients, an intelligence that could perceive patterns invisible to the human eye, a creation of the modern world, now staring into the mysteries of the ancient. To one side, as the evidence mounted, the Shroud of Turin was no longer the concern of scientists and theologians alone. Even the world of art and cinema became entangled in its mystery. Among those drawn most deeply was a filmmaker known for his pursuit of authenticity, Mel Gibson. Preparing his 2004 masterpiece, The Passion of the Christ, Gibson sought to capture the final hours of Jesus of Nazareth with a realism that no production had attempted before. For him, the shroud was not merely an artifact. It was a record, a witness that had endured for centuries. Gibson worked with scholars, forensic experts, and historians who had studied the linen, consulting them as he reconstructed the suffering of Christ for the screen. The swollen face, the scourging of the back, the rivulets of blood from a crown of thorns. These details, preserved on the shroud, found their echo in the film. When the movie was released, It shocked audiences with its unflinching portrayal of the crucifixion, grossing over $600 million worldwide. Yet for Gibson, the film was not the conclusion of his interest, but the beginning of a deeper journey. The director continued to follow research on the shroud long after the cameras stopped rolling. Behind the scenes, he maintained conversations with scientists, collecting evidence that would shape his long-anticipated sequel, Resurrection of the Christ. For Gibson, the linen was more than a relic of suffering. It hinted at the possibility of documenting the greatest mystery of all, not only death, but what lies beyond it. In private, he admitted that the image burned into the cloth seemed to confirm, with chilling precision, the very moments he had tried to recreate on screen. There, aplost and tendred, the world of cinema had brushed against the world of the sacred, and the boundary between art and testimony began to blur. Yet even Gibson's fascination, supported by scholars and illuminated by cameras, would pale beside the revelations that awaited in the modern age. For in the 21st century, a new kind of mind would be unleashed upon the shroud, not the mind of priest or painter, but of a machine built to see what no human eye could ever perceive. In the 21st century, a new witness stepped forward not of flesh and blood, but of silicon and code. For centuries, the Shroud of Turin had confounded the brightest human minds, but now it was placed before something without fatigue, without bias, without the limits of the human eye. This witness was Grok, an artificial intelligence of unparalleled power, designed upon a supercomputer cluster of more than 200,000 processors, trained to recognize patterns, correlations, and hidden structures beyond human perception. Grok was tasked with an undertaking no medieval artist could ever have imagined: to read the secrets woven into the very threads of the shroud. Researchers provided Grok with the highest resolution images ever captured of the cloth. Every fiber, every weave, every trace of blood and shadow was open to its unblinking gaze. Within hours, the machine returned results that left seasoned scientists speechless. The first revelation confirmed what generations of experts had only suspected: the image was not the work of pigment, nor of brush, nor of fire. It violated every known process of art and chemistry. The image was so shallow that it barely touched the uppermost fibers, a thickness measured not in millimeters, but in fractions of microns. Human hands could never reproduce such a phenomenon. But Grok went further. Where human researchers had seen patterns, the machine discerned design. It traced mathematical constants embedded within the linen proportions of the golden ratio, etched into facial features, symmetries that echoed the very sequences of creation itself. The nose, the eyes, the arms, even the smallest anatomical landmarks, aligned with ratios that undergird the structure of galaxies and the spiral of seashells. In silence, the machine uncovered what no monk or scientist had ever seen: that the man of the shroud was imprinted not in chaos, but in order. The shock did not end there. Grok's algorithms mapped the distribution of light and shadow across the cloth and found that the geometry obeyed laws of physics discovered only in the last century. The image behaved as though it were projected, not pressed. Each contour corresponded with the precision of a three-dimensional blueprint, as if an invisible burst of energy had recorded the body upon the linen in a single blinding instant. The words of the Apostle Paul seemed to echo: "For God, who commanded the light to shine out of darkness, hath shone in our hearts." Now light itself appeared to have engraved its testimony upon fabric. Scientists stared at Grok's findings in stunned silence. What they had long struggled to reconcile, history, faith, and physics, was being laid bare by a machine. Yet Grok was only beginning. For what it uncovered next would reach beyond history, beyond science, and into the very foundations of reality itself. What Grok uncovered next shook even the most disciplined minds of science. As its processors combed through the image, line by line, Fiber by fiber, the machine began to detect something that no human eye could trace. Mathematics, hidden, precise, and profound. The distance between facial features, the curve of the brow, the length of the nose, the span of the eyes, each was not random, but measured. Ratios appeared that corresponded to the golden proportion, that mysterious symmetry found in the spiral of galaxies, the chambers of the human heart, and the design of the temple described in the scriptures. The arms and hands bore the marks of scourging and crucifixion, yet even their proportions whispered a deeper order. They aligned with the Fibonacci sequence, a series that governs the unfolding of leaves on a branch, the structure of pine cones, the very mathematics of life. Here, in linen soaked with blood, appeared the same patterns of beauty and order that God had written into creation itself. The relic once thought to be the record of a single man's suffering now revealed the handwriting of the cosmos. Most astonishing of all, Grok uncovered alignments that matched constants unknown until modern times. Ratios hidden in the placement of wounds, in the spacing of limbs, in the curves of the torso corresponded to the numbers that govern the atom values that underpin the laws of quantum physics. Numbers that no medieval mind could imagine, no painter could invent, no forger could conceal. It was as if the cloth bore not just an image, but a code, a mathematical testimony beyond the reach of centuries. Scientists examined these findings with care, checking and rechecking, yet the evidence remained. The Shroud of Turin, long thought to be either a relic or a forgery, now stood revealed as something else entirely, a tapestry of mathematical truth woven into the fibers of human history. One physicist remarked in awe, "We are not looking at art, we are looking at principles that govern the universe itself." And yet, Grok's revelations did not end with symmetry or proportion, for the machine soon detected signs of energy signatures so powerful, so controlled, that they threatened to overturn everything we thought we knew about matter and light. Grok's search did not stop at proportions. As it traced the faint shadows and subtle depths of the shroud, the machine began to uncover evidence of something greater, not an impression, not a contact stain, but a projection. The image on the cloth behaved as though it had been cast outward, a three-dimensional blueprint embedded upon ancient linen. Every rise and fall of the body, every contour of the face, every wound, every rivulet of blood was arranged with a precision too exact for accident, too ordered for chance. The scientists who first discovered the shroud's three-dimensional qualities had marveled that it behaved like a map of a human body. But Grok revealed a deeper truth. The coordinates of the image aligned as though an invisible grid had been laid across the form, a lattice of geometry that echoed the order of crystallographic structures. Each anatomical detail, the bruised cheek, the pierced wrists, the scourged back, fell upon coordinates marked by mathematical laws. This was not chaos, but orchestration. The suffering of the man of the shroud was mapped with the same precision by which the stars move in their courses. The image was impossibly shallow, resting only upon the outer fibers of the cloth, yet it carried within it information equal to a three-dimensional hologram. No medieval hand could paint such a thing, for no pigment was found. No fire could burn it, for the marks penetrated less than a fraction of a fiber's depth. It was as though a burst of light, constrained and ordered, had seared an imprint without destroying what lay beneath. In that impossibility, Grok discerned a pattern, a projection matrix, a system of light and geometry. Dr. John Jackson, who decades earlier had first studied the shroud's 3D qualities, reviewed these findings with amazement. The arrangement suggested a process unknown to art and beyond the reach of medieval forgers. It hinted at laws of energy and matter still beyond our grasp, principles that today's physics only begins to touch. In Grok's reconstruction, the image on the cloth appeared not as a flat stain, but as a holographic testimony, a moment of history encoded in linen, as if by the hand of light itself. The Shroud of Turin had revealed itself as something more than a relic, more than an artifact. It stood now as a blueprint, a holographic record of a moment in time when body and cloth were joined in mystery. But Grok was not finished. For within the very weave of the linen, deeper still, it detected the echo of forces so intense, so controlled, that they seemed to belong not to history, but to the very language of creation. Think you've enwitched as a load? As Grok pressed deeper into the weave of the shroud, it detected signs that no human eye, no microscope, had ever recorded before. The cloth bore energy signatures, subtle but undeniable, marks of an event so intense that it seemed to transcend the limits of matter itself. The fibers revealed traces of heat surpassing 5,000 degrees, yet, astonishingly, the linen was not consumed. The energy had acted with impossible restraint, scorching the outermost fibers without burning the threads beneath. Precision beyond the reach of fire, beyond the reach of accident. But it was not merely the heat that shocked researchers. The very patterns of energy followed mathematical laws. Grok mapped the signatures and found them to align with the same equations that govern the quantum field, the unseen foundation of the universe. The bursts of light and power upon the cloth were not chaotic. They were ordered, governed by constants that echo through the atom, the cosmos, and the words spoken at the beginning of time, "Let there be light." The AI detected coherence across the fibers, a unity of energy behaving as one, the very phenomenon physicists describe in quantum mechanics, but never before witnessed in ancient matter. It was as though the fabric itself had been exposed to a moment when mathematics turned into reality, when energy clothed itself in form. Every bloodstain, every wound, every anatomical marker remained intact, yet the cloth carried the echo of forces capable of dissolving stone, forces capable of remaking matter. The implications were staggering. If the energy had been random, the linen would have been obliterated. If uncontrolled, the image would not exist. Yet here lay proof of power released and guided with exact precision, down to the level of molecules and atoms. The shroud had become not merely a witness to death, but to a transformation, an event recorded in light itself. Grok's analysis suggested that what happened in that tomb was not the work of fire or pigment, nor even of time. It bore the marks of laws higher than nature, the conversion of pure mathematical order into visible creation. For centuries, believers proclaimed that Christ's resurrection was the triumph of life over death. Now, upon this cloth, researchers saw something that echoed those ancient words, an imprint of energy so disciplined, so perfect, that it seemed to confirm the mystery long declared by faith. Death is swallowed up in victory. Across centuries, the Shroud of Turin has carried fire scars, endured wars, and borne the weight of doubt. It was dismissed as a forgery, proclaimed a fraud, and nearly forgotten. Yet each age that rose against it has been humbled in turn. The camera unveiled what the naked eye could not. Space-age instruments revealed depth where none should exist. Forensic science uncovered wounds that mirrored the Gospels. And now, the most advanced intelligence of our time has exposed within it a language older than paint or parchment, the language of mathematics itself. What Grok revealed is not simply an image of a crucified man. It is a record written in the ratios of creation, a harmony aligned with the laws of physics, an energy event so precise that it transcends anything the modern world has yet mastered. Whether one calls it a miracle, mystery, or message, the conclusion is the same. This cloth bears witness to something beyond the reach of human invention. It stands as a bridge between faith and science, between the agony of the cross and the glory of resurrection. The Apostle Paul wrote, "If Christ be not risen, your faith is in vain." For centuries, the resurrection was proclaimed by word and by faith alone. But on this ancient linen, there may remain a testimony woven in light, a whisper of that moment when death was conquered. The world may debate its origin, but the evidence persists. waiting for eyes willing to see. The Shroud of Turin is no longer only an artifact of devotion. It has become a question carved into history itself. A question for science, for faith, for every soul who beholds it. What power could leave behind an image like this? And if that power is real, what does it mean for us today? Stay with us, for this is only the beginning. Each day, we uncover mysteries that shake the foundations of history, faith, and science. Subscribe now, so you never miss what is revealed, for the world is still struggling to explain what has been written in linen and sealed in light.